Okay, so I got this lady here, and the reason why I picked her was because her hair is really difficult to work with because it's real frizzy. And the idea here is that we want to use something other than just the eraser tool to cut her out of the background and maintain a lot of this hair, and just like the details of it. So first thing I'll do is unlock the background layer, go into the channels panel there, and then I would actually click the channel that has the most contrast. So you can see like the red channel has, it's a little bit grayer looking than the green or the blue, but the blue's got like the most dark and bright contrast in there. So what I do is actually pick the blue and just like selecting content through the channels. This is kind of the same idea, except we're going to actually boost the levels in the channel. So boost the contrast in the channel itself. So I'm going to control click it and hit duplicate channel, and then just hit OK. And then turn that channel on, and then so I have just a duplicate of the blue. And so this duplicate of the blue, I'm going to actually use some of my color editing tools on that. So I'll go to image and levels, and then I'll make it, kind of the darks darker, and then I can leave the brights, make them a little bit brighter. But essentially I'm just boosting the contrast of the already contrasty image. So I'll just hit undo and redo to show the kind of difference before and after. So at this point, I'm going to load this channel as a selection, just with this load channel as selection option down here. So that's loaded. Now I'm going to go back to layers, and I'm going to click on the thumbnail here that was in color, and then so now I can still see my selection happening there on the color image. So I jumped from the channels back to the layers so I can get that. And so now at this point, I'm going to actually control click this layer, and I'm going to have that selected, and then I'm just going to do this mask layer here. So I'm going to add a layer mask to it. So this selected the opposite of what I want, so I'll hit undo, and then I'll do the inverse of selection over here, and then I'll reselect a mask. So now I have the hair piece that I wanted, and then all of her face is kind of like semi-transparent too, based on like what I had in my selection, which is fine. So now I'm still at the point where I need to keep working on this selection, and I'm going to do that through this layer mask thumbnail here that popped up. So I'm going to actually hit Alt click, and then so Alt clicking this thumbnail will actually get me into what is basically the mask part of the layer. And really the idea here is the same as our quick mask mode, where we would be using the brush tool to paint in the areas that we want to keep masked, or I guess keep unmasked, and then not paint over the areas that we want to keep transparent. So if I painted over that and I'll go back, you can see like half of her face is showing up now. So if I alt click again, I'll go back and then finish kind of painting in the area with my brush tool that I'm going to want to keep in the image. And so here I can let me kind of adjust this thing a little bit. Okay, zoom out. So here I can use other tools like my pen tool, for instance, and I'm going to just kind of use that to kind of define an edge as well, so I don't have to be as precise with my my brush tool to fill this stuff in. So this is a really kind of complex area that I'll definitely need this pen tool to trace out. And then once I make this selection with my pen tool of this mask, it'll be a little easier to trace her out along the edge of her neck and stuff. So I'm just again using my pen tool, using my alt key at the end of this anchor point to kind of reshuffle the angle of the path too. And so once I close my path out that I want, I'll again go to paths and then use my drop down to hit make selection. And I'll just hit OK for a new selection. And then I'll just, with my brush tool again, I'll be able to actually brush it a lot kind of less precisely to fill in that piece. Command D to deselect, and then kind of go back and brush the rest of this stuff in, kind of more rough. Again, when I go to that edge of her clothing, I'll have to probably use my pen tool again. Let me see if I can see if my magnetic lasso would be an option too. So I can magnetic lasso this edge too, and it'll probably get it done a little faster than the pen tool. But essentially, the gist is that you can use all these different tools to select the edge to make your job go a little faster. Double click to close that off, hit my brush again, fill it in, and I'll do my lasso again for this last part. Since this is just the corner, take my brush, I have to select the inverse there to see. I kind of selected that square, but then I just did the inverse selection there to make it faster. Command D. Some of this part here I actually messed up on, so I actually can erase it. So erase that selection. My opacity, I can adjust that so I don't have to click it too many times. I can just go over it once quick. Okay, and then some of these inner pieces of the hair I'm going to have to select. So just to give a preview, I can go back and see now she's more filled in. And then some of these little pieces of the hair I'll need to go back and fill in, so like kind of these highlights. And so just with the brush, I'll just finish that up like that. All right. Okay, so she's pretty cut there. But what I'm going to do, and I typically will make a new layer and then bring it behind the figure that I'm cutting and then fill it with a color. So what I did is a Command A to select the whole entire canvas on this layer that's behind her, and then hit Edit Fill, and then I'll choose a color. I usually choose pink because that's really something that's very noticeable. And so now the reason why I do this is they can see that there's like this halo effect going on around her hair, so it still looks a little bit Photoshoppy if I put it on like a black background or something like that. So there's one way to take care of that, and that is to create a new layer on top of this layer. So she's kind of going to be in between these two layers now. And then for this new layer, I'll have to Control and click and then select this Create Clipping Mask. And so what the Create Clipping Mask is going to do is actually make this layer a mask of the layer beneath it. So the pixels on this layer are exactly the same pixels that are on the layer beneath it. So if I were to select something outside of this figure here, and paint something there, I wouldn't be able to paint anything there. I'd just only be able to touch the pixels that are equivalent to the ones on her layer. So to show what that's all about, I'll do my Clone Stamp tool. So I'll hit S, and what I want to do is make sure that my top layer is still selected, and then under this sample box here, what I can do is actually select this current and below. And so what that means is that when I hit my Alt key and then click with my Clone Stamp tool, I'm actually pulling a sample from the layer beneath this layer 2, which is the layer of the girl. So now when I take that sample and then click on these ends of the hair follicle, it's actually going to be adding artwork to this layer 2 here. So I can even turn it on and off and show you that I sampled the layer underneath this new layer, but I'm actually painting on the layer itself with my selection. So then what I'll do is actually just go through this whole thing and kind of clean up all of these like real hazy edges with using the Clone Stamp tool and this method of just sampling and then clicking along the edge, sampling and clicking along the edge. And until I get what's more more believable. And it really just all started from finding a channel that had enough contrast between the hair and the background. So let's so I have it at a 50% opacity, and you can always go lighter if you wanted to, or darker, but I don't like to do it at 100% just because when I miss some of these areas I want it to blend more. Alright. Almost there. When you get to the kind of closer to her face, it's a little bit harder. But I don't have to worry too much because I have this layer mask. And you can see this thumbnail here, it's kind of starting to fill in like where I'm actually, adding stuff. So you can see the before and after when I turn it on or off. And so the closer I get to kind of her neck, the more careful I have to be at this part. Alright, in this area, this is probably the closest part. But the nice part about it is once this is done, you don't really have to, you can kind of swap a background out without worrying about whether or not it's going to blend in enough or not. And also this is way quicker than and more accurate than actually just taking an eraser tool and just going around her hair as best you can, because you will really be able to notice that. So that's how you would cut her out like that. So again, this is kind of before and after. So then finally, now that I have this kind of where I know it's pretty much foolproof, I can just delete that background and then put her on another background. So I got this snake skin layer. I thought this worked because it was kind of almost like a dragon or something. Oops, so I actually dragged that into her image, so I'm gonna have to make sure that I make a new layer that I can drag into and release this one back. There we go. I had to release the clipping masks and then reapply it with this layer so there was it released and then created again. So you can kind of at least go back and forth. So now with my background layer selected, I can just I'll drag this one in and then resize it. So I'm hitting keys I'm not meaning to hit. So something like that. Let me actually show this background in a couple different filters. So you've probably seen these different filters before that you can use on any kind of image. But what you do is just go to filter and then filter gallery with a layer that you want to apply a filter to selected. And you have all these different options. Of course, some are color, some are going to end up looking black and white, but I can choose these different styles and kind of see what work. This, I'm not going to kind of go through all of these, but it's pretty self-explanatory. You can kind of see these different options here in a pull-down menu, and you can let's start with rough pastels. Let's say you can adjust the stroke length and detail if you want more or less, things like that. You can change to a texture, like a canvas texture, something like that. Just whatever you think might help give a little more character to the background. Something like that. I think for this image I use like a, yeah, something like this, like a sponge. So this is more experimental. If you feel like you want to use something like this to give your image some kind of a character or something, actually stained glass might be nice. That might be something you might want to experiment with. So at this point it's just very, very abstract. So you know, experiment with those. I think you'll learn a lot from that. Again, sometimes I'll resort to a filter if an image is just really bad and pixelated. If an image is really bad and pixelated, I'll actually play off of that theme and give it like a look of like a painting or a drawing or something like that, so it's not, so it doesn't look intentionally bad. So that's kind of my resort, the last resort I go to if I need to fix a bad image or something like that. So that is that.